John. All right. Praise the Lord. Sorry. Sound check. Everything is going good. We all good? Praise the Lord. All right. We're back with another one. We're going to be continuing our John series. We are on John chapter 6. Like I said before, we had a bit of a break, but we're back into it. And we're going to try and complete the John series study. So we're continuing on. We're in the 6th chapter now, where Jesus is going to expound a lot about bread, and it might not seem that important, but after we read a bit of what Jesus has to say with bread, we're going to see the significance of it. So anyhow, praise the Lord. Welcome back to another episode in the Shield of Faith. I pray that you guys continue to stay blessed by what we're going to be sharing in regards to what Jesus has to say and the revelations that we bring out of this. And obviously there's going to be so much more that we can share from this, but this is in the hopes that it does provoke you as well to get to know more of your word, get to know more about Jesus, and hopefully this can bring some kind of clarity to your life, whatever it may be, which part of it that you may take from this and allow that to penetrate your heart and help you out in some kind of way. Anyhow, let's get into this. So I'm going to be doing John chapter 6, verse 1 to 21. And I'll just read that through real quick for you guys. And this is what it says. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" ? He said this to test him, for he himself knew that what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. Where am I up to? And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking the sea, and coming near the boat, they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Now, again, just like with everything else that we've been touching on in the John series, there's a lot of information that we can draw from this. But just with time, we'll try and simplify it as much as possible and get right into the crux of the message, hopefully. So, bread holds a lot of significance because it's talked about from the Old right through to the New Testament. And it's important and there's a lot of importance from, physical to spiritual. And you can see why that's so evident, because it's a food of sustenance that Jesus uses, and he uses that to try and better our understanding of life, right? So let's just get right into it. Verse 1 and 2. There's a large crowd following him, which they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick, right? So following him, you see why they were following him, because of the medical treatment that was being provided through the miracles of his hands, right? So this is why they followed him. But it was to also draw them in. I mean, it was a gift that God had blessed the church with. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Signs, miracles, wonders, the giftings of whether it be talking in tongues or whether it be words of wisdom or healing or faith or whatever it may be. God has gifted the church with these things so that it would draw the crowds. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that it's all focused on the power of God, but neither should it be neglected. Because that's what tends to happen a lot, is that nowadays we say the word, but nobody wants to walk out in faith. Everybody focuses so much on the word and everybody's studying the word that we get very few people who actually walk out the word. And so we've got to find that balance. You can't be all about miracle signs and wonders and neglect the word, and you can't be all about the word and neglect the miracle signs and wonders. It should be working hand in hand. And we got so many people out there who, I guess, abuse both sides of it. And so it's not for us to look at one side and choose one side and which one's more abusive in their, in whatever respect they're in. But it's for us to find that balance within the text ourselves. It's for us to be able to walk in faith ourselves and to understand it from the perspective that Jesus was trying to give us. That's why we get that conviction. That's why we have that relationship with God. Anyhow, verse 3 to 6, Jesus went up on a mountain and there he sat down with his disciples, so on and so on. And so in this part here, it says, in verse 5, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" ? He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he will do. I find it funny because if he already knew what he was going to do, then why ask the question, right? It's an important note that that John puts in his gospel. He's saying Jesus already knew what he was going to do, but he just done it just to test him anyway. The thing was, he needed us to see the problem first in order to seek after a solution. And that's usually how Jesus operates. It's usually how God operates. When God operates, it's within the realm of what's the word I'm looking for? Impossible. That's usually where Jesus operates. Usually where God operates, it's within the realm of the impossible, that we can't do it. With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible, right? So here, Jesus asked this question. If he's asking this question, then there's a reason why. He wants us to try and figure out what the solution is. And obviously, in this situation, we can't find a solution. Well, not one that's logical enough for us to understand anyway. If he gave us answers to questions we aren't asking, then we won't see the value in the solution. That's one thing that we've got to learn, is that if God just gave everything to us on a silver platter, because usually we'd like to try and, sometimes people pray prayers where it's all about, meeting our needs, always meeting our needs. And there are times where we just want things and we don't really need it. But it's only until we need something, then we're going to see the value of that solution. So sometimes, like, how come God hasn't done this? How come God hasn't done that? Maybe you don't actually need it yet. Maybe you might feel like a need, but you don't actually need it yet. Maybe there's something else that you need that you're going to be able to see the value of when you do get the answer, right? Verse 7. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get even just a little, right? So I love how he calculates. I love how he calculates and shows that even if they had this amount of money, that it still would not be sufficient. So you got Philip here. I don't know whether he was some kind of mathematician or whatever he was. I don't know if he added to the problem, because now he's talking about, even if we had this much, we can't even feed these guys, and if we were able to feed them, they wouldn't be full. So there wouldn't be enough to go around. So it would seem like there's more of a problem than there is a solution, right? Verse 8 and 9 says, one of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many? So more problems get added to the equation. Andrew even shows another solution, from a kid who had 5 loaves, 2 fish, and even then he's trying to show that's still not going to be enough because they got 5,000 people to feed. So it was obvious that it was never going to be enough. So now we reach a point where they've reached every logical conclusion that they could come to, because Jesus asked the question, where are we to buy bread to be able to feed these people, right? So now Jesus' question that's asked, they're trying to find a logical answer to it. They can't. They just simply can't support the need for this group, which is a good thing because that's what God is looking for, to meet our need. And usually when the problem is bigger, God is within the mix of the solution, right? So verse 10 and 11 says, Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place. So the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. So that was, right up to verse 12. Notice that Jesus makes his move after they've run out of options. Do you know that's how God operates now? Usually we just say things and we blurt things out and we're just like, now. Okay, you know what? God's not meeting my need. I'm gonna have to find another solution. And so we become so self-sufficient, especially in a generation that we're living in, or in the Western society, in the West. There are so many solutions out there. Whether it's medical, we got hospitals. Whether it's food, we got restaurants in every corner, or whatever it may be. We need finance. You got the government. So it will almost seem like we're in a place where we can be self-sufficient. So that's one thing that we've got to be careful of, is that we're not so self-sufficient to the point where we don't need God, So where was I? Let me just. So he sat them down, right? So he makes his move after they run out of options, but this correlates so well with the wedding in John chapter 2. Jesus doesn't make his move until after they've run out of wine. That's when he tends to the need. If you don't have the need, then there won't be a supply of the solution. God won't give the need if you don't need it. It sounds so simple, but the thing is, so many times people don't see God provide or see the hand of God move because they don't depend on where the need is going to come from. It's an important thing to know, right? The first time we see this, bread, right? The first time we see the mention of bread, it's in Genesis chapter 3, verse 19, right? It's within the curse that God brings to Adam. And when he curses them, he says, he's cursed, sweat of thy brow, and you're going to be doing this for bread. So it's the first time that it's mentioned. This was going to be the very thing that would sustain man in his everyday living. And this is what he would be striving for, because this is what's mentioned within the curse. I mean, you fast forward a bit, we see this in the Exodus, that when they are in need and they come out of Egypt and they're going into the wilderness, and it's like, yo, we're hungry. Like, where's the food at? So God supplies the manna. And the source of his sustenance came from him, right? The source of this bread came from God. It didn't come from anywhere else because they're in the middle of a wilderness. There was no bakery down the road. It had to come from somewhere. And so one of the biggest miracles that you see is manna raining down from heaven. When we look at the New Testament, Jesus says this to the devil, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, right? So now it's not just bread, but by the source of it, of where that bread comes from. What's funny is that he talks later on about Moses not giving you that bread. So in this same chapter, he talks later on about, Moses did not give you that bread from heaven, but it was his Father that gives the true bread from heaven. So he really emphasizes on the source of where it comes from. So yes, it was Moses that was used as a vessel for the bread to be distributed through. But ultimately, it's not about Moses. It's about where the bread actually came from. The word, the bread itself was to be able to sustain them, but where it was coming from, the source, is what's important for us to know. The word bread in the Hebrew is the word lechem, right? Give you a bit of a Hebrew class just for a second. And the word lechem just means bread, right? So if you put the word beit lechem, that word itself means house of bread, right? And when you see how Jesus is the source of everything, then you see God's intentional plan of giving his son to the world, to the point where even his starting place of where Jesus started from, where he was birthed from, held such great significance. Where was he born? Bethlehem, which is the Hebrew word, what I was just saying, Beit Lechem, which means house of bread. So even then, the source of bread, you see God's intentional plan, allowing him to be born in a place where it was called house of bread. So there's a lot of significance to that, right? Verse 12 to 14. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets and fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. The people concluded that this was the prophet that was to come because he met the needs of their hunger. And this is so often the case, even today. Even though you could be going to church, it's only when your spiritual hunger is satisfied that you will seek to be around that which can meet that need. I know a lot of people who, we've grown up in churches and, we've been there, we've done that. But then when somebody preaches a gospel or somebody helps you in a way to find out more about God or what the gospel message is actually about, they meet a spiritual hunger. And when that spiritual hunger is met, you're going to seek to be around that. You know what I mean? So what happens afterwards is now they're trying to take him and crown him and make him king. But Jesus had a will to fulfill. Jesus had a will to complete. And it was these types of temptations that tried to draw him away from fulfilling the will of God. It's the same. It's almost the same temptation that we see in his 40-day fast, and he's in the wilderness. He's there, and what's Satan trying to tempt him with? Bread, but also Satan wants to tempt him with, I'm going to make you ruler over all these things if you fall down and you worship me. So he's tried to make him a king before he even done anything. It's another temptation, right? But the thing was, Jesus is already king. He left that behind in order to humble himself to the form of a servant to come and serve and help us to understand the gospel message, right? Knowing that, knowing the pride that it could build or the intentions of their hearts, he withdrew himself for the glory of God alone. Because that glory eventually was going to come to him, but there was a redemptive purpose of why he came down to earth, right? Now, I'll finish with this story here where Jesus walks on water. And then the next part of it, we can visit that next week. So Jesus here walks on water. Now, most of you guys know that story. If you wanna read it, John chapter 6 verse 16 to 21. And it's in the other gospel accounts as well. Now, Jesus walks on water. This story holds a lot of significance because when he comes out to the water, there's a storm brewing, and there's a lot that's going on. And all the disciples are in the boat, and they're all scared. They don't know what's going on. And then Jesus appears, and then one of them is like, "Yo, it's a ghost." But Jesus says, "It is I, do not be afraid." I love how Jesus gives them that clarity. And I love how Jesus shows them that in the midst of a storm, he still has control of it. Now, what happens, you see this in another account. I think it's in Mark somewhere. If you can pull that up for me, please. It's in the other gospel accounts, right? So this is where you see Peter walking on water as well. What's amazing about that is you got Jesus coming up to them, but it was only Peter who says, "Lord, bid me to come to you. Call me to come out to you." And so Jesus says, "Come." But when Jesus comes and he speaks to them, he addresses all of his disciples, but only one of them respond. And what I love about that story is that you can condemn Peter for doubting. You can start saying, see, you don't want to be like Peter, where you start to walk by faith, but then you start to fail along the way. Here's the issue. This is one of the biggest issues that I have, because I know that it's something that I still have to work on as well. One of the biggest issues I have is there are so many disciples today that are still sitting in the boat. There are so many disciples today who aren't willing to call out to Jesus to bid you to come out, because to come to Jesus, you have to pursue him by faith. To come to Jesus, it means you're going to have to walk on water. Logically, that doesn't make sense. Logically, that goes against science. That goes against anything that's possible here on earth. But that requires faith. And Peter was willing to walk in this. But my issue is we get so stuck into talking about the Bible and talking about faith, and you got people arguing that the gifts aren't here for us today. And it would almost seem like that's the disciples on the boat. It would almost seem like these are the people that are sitting at the boat saying all these things, but nobody actually wants to step out. And it only takes one. It's cool that we saw Peter doing that, but just like Jesus in his ministry, the way that he operated, it always took just the one, by one man's example. Now, it's a revelation for us to try and understand today, because staying in the boat is easy. Walking on water is impossible. But it's the requirement that's needed to be able to pursue God. Not to be able to walk on water, but to be able to have faith in whatever situation that you're in. We so often criticize others for what they may be doing. But even though if somebody's in the faith and they're giving it a go, that's okay. If they get it wrong, that's okay. If you get it wrong, if you start to sink, it's okay, because Jesus is still there at the end of the day to help pull you out of your troubles. And our biggest issue is we're not even willing to allow ourselves to be in a situation where we could possibly fall for Jesus to be able to pull us up. Sometimes we want to see Jesus do things for us, but we're too fearful of the circumstance. So that's what we've got to really be careful about. One of my biggest issues is us as Christians, we need to learn to step out of the boat. Us as Christians, we need to learn to not be so fearful of what the crowds have to say. Because what would have been the opinion? I wonder what the opinion would have been for Peter, or for anybody else for that matter. Because a lot of times, we could have opinions of others. A lot of times we could be saying, we could tell others that what you're doing is wrong. I don't believe it's biblical. Are you sure what you're doing is the will of God? And there could be so many questions, and maybe they may be right. But if we stand and we live by people's opinions, then we're never going to be able to pursue faith and see the rawness of God's hand move in our lives. Whether it's to go somewhere, whether it's to move in the power, whether it's to talk to somebody about the gospel or whatever it may be, we're never going to be able to see those things if we're so reliant on people's opinions to allow us to move forward. And so in this story, what I really love about this story is that it allows us to step out in faith. It allows us not to be so fearful of people's opinions. It's not just opinions, it allows us to step out even when nobody else wants to. I shared my testimony last week on, funnily enough, going through water. I didn't plan that one actually. So it was check that out. I'll leave that in the link below. Our car driving through water and everybody else was too scared to do it. Long story short, doing it involved some faith because I didn't know whether the car was going to drown in the water or not. We got through. Praise the Lord. But that was another way to be able to minister the gospel to people. So anyhow, I'm going to leave it at that for now, and we're going to continue on the Book of John series. Coming up soon, we'll try and finish the rest of the chapter 6, hopefully within the next part or next 2 parts. We'll see how we go. But also something exciting. Again, we got the merch for those who wanted merch, but also we got some videos coming up. We got some videos coming up of our evangelizing. So we take it to the streets. Me and my brother, we take it out to the streets and we start talking to people about God. We start questioning people on their faith, not in a bad way, just to see what their thoughts are. And we engage in a lot of conversations. We've got some funny video clips coming up as well because people say some whack stuff, especially when they're not in their right mind. But I hope you guys can check that out. So we're going to put some of those videos out next week. We've got quite a few of them already. Interactions that we have with the crowds out on the street. So that's exciting. And I encourage you guys, get out on the streets or get out somewhere and share the gospel because it's super uncomfortable, but it adds a lot to your walk. So tune in next week so we can delve more deeper into these details. And again, be sure to check us out on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram to keep up with the latest content for your edification, as usual. Share, read, and apply the word. And hopefully, we'll catch you on the next one. Be blessed.